Hey guys, welcome to week two. Let me first, before we get started on anything else, congratulate you guys on making it through the hurdle of week one and all the little hurdles that we had in there, like Blackboard being down so often and the quiz that was way more confusing than I meant it to be. But I also want to take this time to quickly thank you guys for being so on top of things, for being so communicative. You guys seem to have really hit the ground running. I got a lot of questions, a lot of good questions, a lot of you raised concerns about like anything you're confused about, and so I was really impressed with how quick you guys were to reach out and ask and engage with me and with the class. And that doesn't always happen, even in a face-to-face class. So thank you for being so on top of things. And I hope to, continue to be able to engage with you guys as well. So what I want to do in this video is to quickly address some of those concerns, talk about some of the things that we had trouble with week one, and then to move on to the week two stuff. Now let me first start out with that quiz. So I know a lot of you are confused about the late work question on the quiz because what I said, the video contradicted what was supposed to be the right answer in the quiz. Now the reason for that is because the quiz question referred to an older policy that I've since changed, but that I had forgotten to change on the quiz, and so that was completely my fault, and thank you for pointing it out to me so I can adjust it. But let me clarify really quickly. My late policy is exactly what I said in week one, which is no late work unless you contact me before a due date, and we can reach some sort of agreement. Okay, so that is the official policy, and that is what you guys should go on. Now, what this means is I'll go back and I'll give everyone the point for that question, regardless if you got it right or wrong. Now, I'll also be giving you guys a point for another question down there that I went into and I thought was kind of confusing, even though I didn't really get many questions on it, which was the what do you need to do to get an A in this class? And it referenced a grade contract. And a grade contract is something that I don't use anymore. But again, I had forgotten to go back and update the quiz. And so I will be giving everyone credit for that question as well. Okay, so the other thing about the quiz is because Blackboard has been such a nightmare this week, I'm also extending the due date for quiz one to this coming Sunday. So you have this entire week to do the quiz if you have not done so already. So it should be available to you now. If you don't see it this evening, give it 24 hours to update because I just updated the due date. So give it 24 hours before you contact me just to see if it pops up on your screen. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about week one, what we did, and how it kind of fits together into our entire idea of project one. So week one asked you to get to know the class a little bit, right? You did a little bit of reading out of the guide about what 3010 is, and what you should have seen is that this class is basically an opportunity for you guys to learn about and start to engage with a academic or professional community that you want to join. And that's what all of our projects are going to be geared toward, especially project one is going to get us started on that. So you should have gotten a sense of that. The other thing that you guys read for this week was that Swale stuff about discourse community. So I want to take a second to talk about that now that you've had a chance to read it. So what Swales gives us is he gives us 6 key criteria that we can use to define a community as a discourse community. Now, when we say discourse community, what we're talking about is we're talking about a group of people that are united by communication, by discourse, right? And so our goal is going to be to figure out how the community that you want to join communicates, exchanges ideas, and accomplishes their goals, okay? So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about discourse community. We're talking about the way a group of people unite together in order to communicate, in order to achieve some sort of goal. So how do doctors in the medical field achieve their goals, and how do they communicate? How do people in business fields, so on and so forth. So that was what your reading should have done for week one. And then I asked you guys to do your blog one, which was to introduce yourselves and start to think about what communities you might want to investigate, and then to take that ridiculous quiz. Luckily, there is only one other quiz for this entire semester, so hopefully the next one will go a little bit smoother. Okay, so let's take a look at week two then and see what's coming up for us this week. Let's go back in here. The first thing that I want to talk about in week two is that now that we've started to identify a community that you want to join and that you want to investigate, it's time to start to actually research that community and to try to make contact with professionals in that community. And so if we go back, our job for project one is to identify Swales' characteristics and to and to talk about how your community meets all those characteristics. And we're going to go over that in detail in just a second. But I also want you guys to make contact with someone in that community, right? So I want you to try to reach out and actually cultivate some sort of contact with a professional in your community. So it could be a working professional, a scholar, a graduate student in the program that you're interested in, an advisor, or even a librarian that works with members of that community. And essentially what you're going to do is you're going to reach out to them and just say, hey, I'm interested in joining this community. And I am interested in just the ways that this community functions. So like, what are some of these major topics? What are some important journals that people publish in? What are some organizations? So what this means is you're going to have to introduce yourself, introduce your reason for contacting them, and then just ask them for any advice they can give you. Now, the reason I have you guys do this is because it's really good practice to do what's called a cold call, which is to contact someone out of the blue and to develop relationships, because this is something that's going to pay off and pay dividends later on. It's if you can develop relationships with people in your community and learn how to speak to them and to ask questions, it's a really valuable skill to have later on. And so try to reach out to someone in your profession. Now, if you can't get a hold of anyone, or if they don't email you back, your other option would be, if you want to learn more about this stuff, is to go to your library research guides, this link right here. And what the librarians at Wayne State have done is they've cultivated research guides for each field. So business, law, medical field, humanities, so on and so forth. And you can look around in their guides and you'll be able to answer these questions as well. So you should be doing this anyway, but if you can't get a hold of someone, then the librarian for that particular field would be a really good person to contact as well. Okay, so that's what I want you to be thinking about this week is to reach out to someone in your field and try to ask them some questions and cultivate a relationship, or start to cultivate a relationship with someone in that field. So that's your big job for this week. Okay, now let's go to the nitty-gritty stuff. Okay, so the other stuff you'll be doing this week is you'll be doing some readings. Now, these two will just be kind of an overview on how to and why to conduct research. This one is really interesting because what Wardle is going to do is this article is going to give you a really good example of what happens when someone doesn't play by the rules, essentially, when you join a community. So like when you join your profession, you're going to have to model your behavior in a way that's appropriate for that profession. Essentially what this means is when you join that discourse community, your behavior and the way that you interact in that community will have to be appropriate for that. Now what's going to happen is Wardle's going to give you an example of what happens when someone doesn't. So there's this really interesting kind of story in this article about a person who joins a new community but then doesn't do all the things that he needs to do to be a member. You'll see that creates a lot of friction. So it's going to really illuminate the importance of participating effectively within the community in order to be an effective member. Okay, so we're doing this reading for this week. And the other thing that you'll be doing is uploading a draft of your project 1. And what you'll see over here is, you might not be able to see it yet, but by Wednesday you'll see this little tab over here. It says peer review groups. I'm going to put each of you in groups of like 4, and you'll upload your rough draft to that. And then by Sunday I'll ask you to just comment on your peer's draft via the little comment section. So just like you would in a normal face-to-face English class, just read your partner or your peer group member's draft, and then just type up some quick comments like, hey, I really like this. This is something that confused me, or I have a question on this, or have you thought about this? The general kind of peer review questions. Now what's going to happen is I'm going to create these groups and upload and enable them by Wednesday, and on Wednesday I will also upload a video explaining step by step of how to go about uploading a draft, commenting on a draft, and what you should be doing. So don't worry about this quite yet, but just keep an eye out for it because it's coming up later this week. Okay. So that is what we're going to be doing. So we are doing some reading, we're making contact with a professional in your field, and we're uploading a draft. Now the other thing that I want to look at now that we've got some time is I've got 2 student samples down here, and you should be reading these as well this week. Product 1 is a really weird project if you haven't seen an example of it yet. The students often think that this is some big long essay. What you're going to see when you look at these examples, though, is that it's essentially a fleshed out bullet list. It's a fleshed out bulleted point list. So let's take a look. So we'll pull up this one. And we'll pull up this one. Okay, so let's take a look here. So here is an example of a previous student's research guide. So you'll see that they've got like a nice cover sheet on here. Obviously, your name will be here instead of student number. And let me do just kind of a quick run through, and then we'll go back and work through it. So you can see essentially that what this person has done is that they've taken the major characteristics that Swales gives us, and they've started to flesh them out. So here is how this group illustrates the common public goals. Here's how this group illustrates the major mechanisms of intercommunication. Here are some prominent venues where they participate, and then here are some research questions. Now, let me go back here real quick just to, let's look at the minimum requirements. Now, what you'll see is that what they've done is essentially just listed these out and fleshed them out. Here's the major characteristics that Swale gives us. Then I'll ask you to put a definition of discourse community in your own words. What does discourse community mean to you? How would you define it? And then you're just fleshing out each of his characteristics. What are 3 major practices that members use to communicate? So if we're thinking about like in my field, which is the kind of English scholar studies field, the major ways that we exchange ideas are conferences, books, and journal articles, right? So what are they in your community? Is it, in the medical field, you're doing probably research articles, you're probably giving talks and medical textbooks or whatever, right? So like, what are the major ways that people in your community are exchanging ideas? And then you're going to see participatory mechanisms. So like, what are some specific places that people are publishing and sharing information? So this is going to ask you to kind of do some research and figure out what are the major conferences in my field, or what are the major magazines, or what are the major journals, or the major newspapers that members in my field use and pay attention to. And looking for specific examples. So don't just say like, oh, the newspapers. Say, oh, the Wall Street Journal is really important because I'm going into finance or whatever it is. And then different mechanisms of communication. So how do people interact with each other? So we're talking like email. We're talking about articles. We're talking about websites. Whatever it is. What are some different ways that they talk to each other? And this is something that you're going to be looking up as well. And this is where those research guides can come in really handy that I showed you up there. What are 3 major topics in your field? And so if you're in the medical field, what are 3 major topics that really interest your community? So like for example, in the English field, we're really interested in like race studies. We're really interested in kind of writing from like oppressed cultures, things like that. So those would be major topics in my field. So as you're doing some research and finding out this information and looking at those research guides, you'll see that a lot of them are talking about a few particular topics. So what are those topics? And then what I'm going to ask you to do is to just think about like 2 or 3 questions that you have about those topics. So it's not 2 to 3 per topic, but it's 2 to 3 questions total. So if you come, let's say, into a medical field and you see that genetic testing is a big deal, what are some questions that you have about that? What are you curious about? What do you want to know more about, right? So these are going to be pretty broad to start out with, but like, what are some things that you're wondering about these topics that you found? And then if you do reference or cite anything in your research guide, then you'll need a works cited entry for that. And then this invention portfolio thing is going to be more important for later essays, so don't worry about invention portfolio right here. So let's take a look at this example then we just had up. Okay, so quick cut, movie magic. I wanted to cut to the example real quick just to show you how this plays out. So this is that student sample 2 that was on there, and this is the better of the 2. So what you'll see is all this person has done is taken each of Swale's concepts, fleshed them out by giving examples in detail from the community. So what are the common goals? What are the types of things that they say? And just listed them out, and then just ended this with a couple of questions. And so look this one over. Again, this is the better of the 2, so pay attention to this one more than the other one. This is number 2. And you'll see that all you're doing is you're fleshing out a bulleted list that's identifying the major characteristics of your community and introducing some key topics. So take a look, let me know if you have questions, and stay tuned for Wednesday for that peer review group.